let's take it a step further and really dig into a comparison. So what if we looked at roughly the same size gap across 4 different zones? I randomly picked these. I wanted sister zones, if you will. So I thought it'd be interesting to compare the difference in Zone A and Zone B, since they're both just underneath the high of the prior day. And then Zone Z, forgetting to push the button, Zone C and Zone D, which are both beneath the low of their prior days. 2 of those are long strategies, 2 are short strategies. Let's test 3 different targets, targeting with no target. Let's just leave it alone and see where it ends up at the end of the day if you fade it at the open. Let's target gap fill, and let's target a point beyond gap fill. And then let's test no stop, sort of a raw play, if you will, which I don't recommend, but it just gives you information to better understand the dynamics or the personality of a zone. And a 6-point stop, just that nice medium-sized stop. Let's compare win rate and profit factor. Does that sound okay? Can everyone understand me okay? I'm a little bit southern and a little bit nasal, and I talk a little fast. All right, so here are the 4 different zones, the A, B, C, and D. And this is a baseline, just looking at the win rate for the scenario, which is 48%, of fading all 3 to 7-point gaps, basically an average 5-point gap. And we break it down by where they occurred, Zone A, B, C, or D. And I show the win rate and the profit factor. And again, this scenario is I'm trying to understand the personality of that zone. No target and no stop. What happens if you enter? Is there any difference? And you leave it alone and close it at the end of the day. But one thing that stands out to me is that you actually have a profitable strategy using no stop and no target for one of the zones. That's not bad. Only 50% of them work. What it tells you is that gaps in that zone tend to, if they fill, probably continue going down a little bit more and finishing below where they opened. And the ones that don't fill don't run as much as against you as the ones that do. Okay, scenario number 2, let's target the gap fill, but still no stop. What you see here is the baseline goes way up to 71% down at the bottom, all 3 to 7-point gaps, targeting gap fill with no stop over the past 10 years. 70% of them winners, basically not very profitable down here at the bottom. But when you break them down by zones, you start seeing some interesting delineation. The win rate actually went up on quite a few of them. This was now 76%. And barely, but historically profitable without a stop. Okay, let's get more realistic, because again, I want to be crystal clear. Don't ever trade futures without a stop, or I wouldn't recommend it. I don't, and it's very, very dangerous. Here we target gap fill and use a reasonable 6-point stop. A, B, C, and D. Again, Zone B is the most profitable. Win rate went down when you put a stop on it. That makes sense. Profit factor went up. That makes sense. Interestingly, this zone that didn't look very good before is now a decent winner at roughly 60% and a 1.22 profit factor. Not great, but hey, it's something to work with. Now, what if we did something crazy and targeted a point beyond gap fill? Look at the difference here. Zone B, profit factor goes up to 1.5. Win rate goes down. And for me personally, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I don't really get interested or trade anything that doesn't have a profit factor of 1.5 or at least 1.4. And just psychologically, so you understand it, what that's saying is if you traded all the gaps in that zone for the past 10 years, targeting 3 points below the gap, right? So Zone B, you're shorting at the open. That big dotted line is the prior day close on the candle, and you're targeting 3 points underneath. 58% of those were winners. And the cumulative profits from those winners was 50% greater than the cumulative losses of the losers. That's pretty good. And no other way to say it other than yuck. Look at the win rate down here. 36% of these managed to trade through the gap close area of 3 points without being stopped out using a 6-point stop. not very good. Profit factor is very low. This is actually the exact opposite, 50% greater losses than profits in these two scenarios, roughly. Okay, I'm going to reference this in a few minutes more. I just wanted to point it out for you visually. This is what I call a blood gap. It's just an acronym for below the low of an up day. If you don't remember anything else from this presentation, don't fade blood gaps.